people are not happy with the new ones, I imagine, I find it difficult to believe that these same people tolerated the old ones for so long, because I couldn't live with my conscience in managing migration policy in the previous centers. But the previous centers had a life on their own. They were there when we came. They were there. We didn't create them, we found them. So we can discuss on conditions, Ylva will enlighten us, but having seen the before and after, I can assure you that what is now there, it's something that is dignified. It's something that is compatible to our standards. It has specific places for unaccompanied minors, different facilities for those who are to be returned, different facilities for families, different facilities for women. The food is provided by caterers. It's not done there. There is extensive infrastructure built there to a certain extent in certain islands. Mrs. Zippel, you would be interested to know that the locals have been complaining to me that the standards of some of the infrastructure that would serve the centers were better than their own. For example, is sewage and access. So, and a final thing on the wall, because really this is something that I take a bit personal. The two people sitting in front of you today are the ones who have consistently resisted any calls to build walls, together with the president. We're not in the business of building walls, we're in the business of building bridges. The walls that you found there are not walls in the sense of those some people want to believe. These are facilities that regulate access. Why access needs to be regulated to these centers? Because, as you know, people who claim for asylum, they have to be able to be, how should we call this, located, so that they can be called by authorities and provide the information necessary. So, I agree with you that the good is always the enemy of the better, but really I think what we have managed to put in place is something that is dignified, it is something that is European, not un-European like the centers we inherited.
Ylva, further comments?
Yeah, I said also in my introduction that no, it's clear that it's not everything is fine. That's why we have also started new infringement procedures, and that's one of the things that the Commission can do. And I also said, I think that we could have been more transparent. I agree on that. The request for these documents came more than 1 month ago, but it's 75 documents. So, of course, it would have been good if you have had them earlier. I agree on that. On this reception centers, in the memorandum of understanding of building the reception centers, there is one very important key, and that is that they have to meet the EU Asylum Agency's standards. We have also found out that some of these, what could be important is not in their standards. So there's no secret, actually. There have been some diverging views. Security is an issue, of course, need to be addressed. But in my view, I can really put a question mark on barbed wires, for example. So there are one of the issues where my Deputy Director General frequently are have been in very difficult discussions also with the Greek authorities on this. So it's not perfect, but it's much better than from where we came from, of course. That is no reason to learn lessons from this as well. So that's also why the EU Asylum Agency now is also looking into to update their standards for reception centers. Thanks.
Now we move on to the following group, which will be Sophie in 't Veld for the Renew.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioners, for this exchange of views. At the start, I would like to underline that the European Commission is not the biggest bad guy in the story. That is the national governments who are absent. However, where the European Commission is often an ally when it comes to the legislative process, the European Commission is not an ally when it comes to putting legislation into practice. And that is what we are discussing here today. And I recognize that it's ultimately the national authorities that are responsible. But still, I have to say I disagree with the self-congratulatory tone, Mr. Commissioner. Because have things improved? Probably, if you look closely, some things have improved. But the situation is still dramatic for many people on this continent. So I think, the tone is all wrong. And you may call it pontificating from Brussels. I would actually say reminding you of the European way of life. So, what is the situation? What does it say about the state of the assignment migration policies if secretly the entire European Union seems to be relieved about the re-election of an autocrat in Turkey because his democratic opponent would have actually abandoned the Turkey statement? That is very telling. It tells you what state it is in. To come to the specifics, we've been talking about reception conditions in various places. I'm not going to mention the Netherlands, where people are sleeping outside again, or Belgium, or there are many other places. But let's come back to Greece and see specifically what you said, Commissioner. You say there are not walls, but facilities that regulate access. Well, great. I have facilities that regulate access at home, and I have paintings on them. The facilities that regulate access, I would call them walls. And if people are not free to leave, then it's called detention. So let's be clear here what we are talking about. They are detained. De facto, they are detained. If they cannot leave, they're detained because they're not free to go. So they would like to go out maybe on one day. But then people who want to come in, like journalists and NGOs, are not allowed in. And then the Greek Helsinki monitor, who is monitoring migration policies and in particular pushbacks, is subject to harassment and intimidation by the government. So nobody can really verify what the situation is. Now, we hear from Doctors Without Borders how they judge the situation in Lesbos, for example, and they would not choose your language, quite frankly, because the reception conditions are substandard. Then, another aspect is external policy or external.
Always try to have in mind a time frame.
Yes, I have one more question, Chair. I have one more question. I would like to know what is the role of the Commission when it comes to negotiating deals with the Tunisian government and the Libyan authorities, whatever they are. Thank you.
Okay,
President.
Yes, thank you, President. A few points on the European way of life. Yes, I think that what we have managed to collectively, I repeat, collectively, to bring about is closer to the European way of life than the things that we inherited when we started, that were there for years, and they were shame for Europe. That I can reasonably claim that it's true. The type of language I used, Mrs. Inveld, is not self-congratulatory, and I haven't invented it for myself or for this occasion. These are things that many of the ministers, prime ministers, including your own, I understand, who visited these centers, have clearly demonstrated publicly that the new centers are different, they are closer to the standards, and of course with all necessary caveats of further improvements. Let me also tell you, since we're talking about access, because I was there, and the questions you asked me, I asked on the people on the ground. People are not detained. People are free to come and go, leave and enter. This regulated access is based on a badge system, a bit like we're having in the institutions. And under no circumstances, these centers are detention centers. These are centers for identification and reception. On the important issues that you mentioned on external relations, there will be no European migration policy without a strong external dimension. we will never be able to manage internally unless we're able to manage externally. It's not an accident that in the last 3 meetings of the European Council, heads of state and government have dedicated most part of their deliberations on migration, much more than on the economy or any other subject. And it's not an accident also, or a coincidence, that a substantial part of these discussions, because they did not negotiate the pact that is left for the ministers, was on the external dimension. So, as someone who has been everywhere where we faced problems with our neighbors, I can reasonably assure you that all the work that the Commission has done, together with Ylva Johansson, Josep Borrell, Oliver Verhely, and Jutta Urpilainen, is to intelligently mobilize everything we have at our disposal to create win-win partnerships with countries of origin and transit. This is not something that it's easy. It's not something that will happen. There is no button to push. It requires substantial investment, requires effort, Team Europe approach, member states collaboration. We are working on all fronts of that, and we really hope that by now, another lesson learned, if you like, of the current political cycle is that the people around us who thought that they could use migration as a way to harm us or attack the European Union, now they understand that they have more motives to work with us rather than against us on managing the external aspects of migration.
Ylva.
Yes, there are detention parts in the reception centers. But it's also very clear that you cannot detain any person because this person is an asylum seeker. That is illegal. There are specific times when you are allowed to use detention, and that is clear in the regulation. So in the centers there are detention parts, but we are not allowed to detain people without an individual decision for security or other reasons that is for this specific person, and that is clearly regulated in the key. On Tunisia, I went to Tunis right after Ramadan. I was there the 27th of April. And I negotiated and agreed together with them on actions to prevent irregular migration and also to foster legal migration. That was published in a joint statement that was also published on my Twitter, so it's transparent what we agreed on. But I'm happy to come back here if there are other questions on the relations with Tunisia and what we talked about there.
Thank you. Now we move on to Greens. It'll be Saskia Brikman, but try to phrase your wording as short as possible because we're laying behind and there's still another point on Greece.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioners. But obviously your definition of the European values and way of life is obviously not the same as ours and not the same of those people having to go through the detention centers when coming in on our continent. Coming back to the topic of today is the role of the task force. And we know that the task force representatives overseeing operations in those EU-funded closed control access centers that you mentioned, Samos, Leros and Kos Islands, reported almost daily issues in their facilities between March 2022 and February 23. And the key issues that they reported back to headquarters included, amongst others, what you mentioned, going better, staff shortage delaying asylum procedures, but also shortages in specialized caregivers for unaccompanied minors, lack of access to basic services like healthcare and running water, and allegations of sexual and other violence impacting children. And none of those documents provided to the LIBE committee on the task force communication show any signs that the reported issues have ever been raised or discussed in the task force exchanges with the Greek authorities. So how does the Commission explain this? Why has the Commission not followed up on those issues? And if it has followed up, why have this communication not been disclosed to the LIBE committee? So obviously here we have an issue of transparency of the work of the task force. The second element is what you mentioned, Commissioner, on the infringement procedures. There, we are quite concerned that the task force, with its broad and vague mandate, is being misused to avoid taking infringement action. Ms. Gminder assured that the work of the task force is not used as a reason not to start infringement procedures. But yet, practice reveals the exact opposite. Talking about infringement, the Commission closed 4 infringement complaints against Greece early 2022, with the explicit reason that these matters were being addressed by the task force in its dialogue with the Greek authorities. But no one of the task force documents indicate that these infringements have actually been raised by the task force. So how do you explain this? And can you please explain why the Commission is referring to the task force when it closes infringement complaints, bearing in mind that the enforcement is not part of the stated mandate of the task force? Thank you.
I can start, and then Ilva will discuss. I understand that you are referring to leaked documents that pertain to internal communications in DG Home, right? That's, if I understand well, because I try to understand the source of this information. If these are these leaked documents, I don't know of these documents myself, because, as you know, Vice Presidents steer and coordinate policy. Services are under the authority of the commissioners, but still, I find it very normal that people exchange amongst themselves ideas, suggestions on how things can be better. We always said that there is still much to be done, that the fact that we have improved the situation does not mean that the situation is there as an ideal standard. So I'm not particularly shocked by the fact that people who have the responsibility to make the task force work better exchange among themselves how this can be done. But again, I haven't seen these documents. I don't know. Probably we'll find out more if Ilva.
Ilva.
Excuse me, these are not leaked documents. These are documents that are related to the information requests. Freedom of information requests. This is different from leaked documents, Commissioner.
Sorry, I was not sure. That's why I said I was not sure what the origin of this is. I thought it was the Al Jazeera leaks. But if this is another one, it is the same. Okay. Hello.
Yes, as I said in my introduction, so the task force on the ground are dealing with a lot of problems on a daily basis. There are long row of different problems that comes up. Lack of access to healthcare. There was this water problem. There's been a lot of other things, the unaccompanied minors. And also, as I said, they are working very, very close with the NGOs. And they are also bringing things to the notion of the task force. So this is what they are exchanging between each other, the different kind of things that need to be addressed, and that they raise with the Greek authorities, I think, on a weekly basis. So, of course, you can say, you can put it in 2 ways. One thing is, what is the role of the Commission is to make sure that the EU acquis are being respected. Yeah. If we can do that quicker by the task force than via an infringement procedure, of course that's better, because that can solve problems earlier, easier, quicker. But that is not always the case. That's why we also start infringement procedures. So it's never that we do this to cover up for infringement. But of course, if things can be solved quicker than via the formal infringement procedure, of course that's better, because that will mean that people will have access to the things that they are lacking, if that's the case earlier. If that doesn't work, of course, Commission can also take other actions.
Thank you, Ilva. Now, for ID, Madame Chagnon.
Oui, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you, Vice President and Commissioner. Reception centres are being overwhelmed in France and right across Europe, and we've also got an unprecedented number of arrivals. I mean, what we need to be discussing here is how better to improve reception facilities and arrival facilities for migrants. But a couple of weeks ago, Commissioner, I asked you a question which you didn't reply to, so I'm going to try again now. 2 weeks ago, I suggested the creation of towns where people could be received. So, and we would build those with international assistance next to the areas where disasters were taking place. So to welcome people, to provide health care, schools, whatever it is, and also perhaps they could make an asylum request there, these migrants, so that they could potentially be taken in by a European country. You've got the tragedy in Sudan where millions of people are trying to escape, crossing deserts, and are launching themselves on these dangerous migration routes. Well, perhaps this is the time where we need to look at other solutions rather than sending these poor people on the dangerous path, which is migration. So, Commissioner, could you envisage this kind of solution for the reception of migrants and those who are in need of international protection outside Europe? That's my first question. Secondly, the implementation of your migration pact. Now, last week, I asked you a question on this as well. You didn't answer. Apparently, you didn't have time to answer. But I've just heard that you're keen on transparency. So could you tell us a little bit about the agenda for the implementation of your migration pact, the timetable? So, as I was saying, all reception centres are being overwhelmed. In the Netherlands, your friends are thinking about handing out free bicycles to migrants to stop them stealing them, because there are masses of break-ins and thefts all over the place. I mean, I think your concern is more about dinner time for them, 8 o'clock or 8:30. But I'd rather actually hear about your comments on the two proposals I've just made. Thank you.
Madame Chagnon, le type, bien que vous n'adressez pas vos questions à moi,
Okay, well, your questions aren't aimed at me, but I'll answer anyway by saying that the kinds of problems that you raise are the consequences of the fact that we don't have an overarching, consistent solution on the pact. Everything that people don't like about European migration policy is due to the fact that we don't have a migration policy as we would like it. We're currently crafting one. I think we're not far, actually, from having a European agreement. We're going to need one prior to the European elections so that we can show that Europe can provide solutions. So everything that you don't like is happening precisely because we don't have the tools, laws, procedures and systems in place to enable us to manage this in a logical manner. The time will come, I'm sure, when the problems will mean that we have to ensure that the legislation of the pact is properly implemented, but we're not there yet. And I think that's the problem. So your diagnosis is not incorrect, but the solution is the pact. And I'd like your political group also to rally around this wide-ranging European agreement. Mrs. Johansson now, please.
Actually, the European Commission is one of the biggest contributors to support people that are refugees, that are victims of natural disasters, for example. This is what we are doing, and our colleague Janis Lenarchis mainly to support these kind of structures, to support people that are in immediate need of different kind of emergency support. We are also supporting third countries in the more structural way to build up capacity for their asylum systems, for example, for the reception capacities. This is also part of what we do together with third countries, very often together with UNHCR. When it comes to the implementation, the different legislative files, most of them, they have, a specific date after when they have been adopted finally by the decision of both Parliament and Council. There will be, for the directives, for example, 2 years before they need to be implemented. So having said that, I also think that we will have to look into what kind of support we need to give to member states for the implementation of the pact when we have it all the whole final decision.
Thank you, Ylva Johansson. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, is there anyone willing to make the case for ECR? If not the case there. It'll be for the left. Madame Pelletier, vous avez la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the commissioners. Commissioner, there's one thing that I've been thinking about, because you're talking about it. What is it, the European way of life? Well, exactly what does that mean? I don't know. And I mean, there's differences from country to country. So what exactly is the European way of life that you so desperately want to protect? And then another thing, my colleague from ID has just made a link between migrants and thieves. I would like us to make sure that people aren't making this kind of comparison. An asylum seeker is not necessarily a thief, so I think it would be more respectful to not imply that or say that. On this, the Megalothelma and people on Lesbos, and what actions have been taken by the task force or the authorities to stop the use of this centre. And then we've also been informed about the exclusion of people who've been recognised as refugees, and they haven't been given food or water in Lesbos. And Commissioner, you said both commissioners that you're working together with NGOs, but I'm wondering whether or not there are misunderstandings, because you're saying that you work with them and other times they're being criminalized. So I find it difficult to know whether you're working with them or they're being criminalized. And then on the situation that I was talking, as DG Home received complaints about against violations against EU law. If so, has that been transferred to the task force? And then we know that is the task force jointly involved, or is it just providing support? And then the last question is on the legal framework on the activities in Lesbos and Cyprus. Thank you.
Madame Le Pelletier, la réponse bureaucratique sur...
The bureaucratic answer is in Article 2 of the treaty, but I can give you a more political response. The European way of life is the fact that we are 27 democracies and that we protect minorities and that we are the world leaders in human rights and protection of human dignity, and that the role of women is protected at home and in the workplace. We have universal health, education and care systems. We take care of our older people, and that is what we mean when we talk about the European way of life. Now, you can find some parts of that elsewhere, but everything together you only find in Europe, or maybe in Canada as well. Now, on the other questions, I think that Ylva and Beate will be responding.
Yes. First, what you mentioned about actually there are people in some of these reception centers that have already been granted asylum and are still in the center. And this is one of the issues that we are dealing with, and Beate and his team are dealing with on a daily basis. So they are not formally have their possibilities, because they're not asylum seekers anymore, so they're not covered by that legislation. But the situation is, of course, that they can't be left without food. So we have to find pragmatic solutions to that kind of things. And these are one of the issues that is actually being dealt with on a daily basis here. And NGOs, as I repeat again, the NGOs are essential. it's absolutely necessary, and the work they're doing is absolutely important, and the Commission is not criminalizing any NGOs. On your question on the legal framework, I'm not sure that I understood what kind of your question on that.
Now, the situation goes like this. I see that some members are willing to complement or to re-examine, but Vice President Skinas has announced that he should leave by 17:45. We are 20 minutes lagging behind. And there's still a point on pushbacks on Greece, which is absolutely essential for our agenda. So I suggest we move on so that President Skinas will make a presentation on the pushbacks, alleged pushbacks on Greece, and then 5 minutes, if you may, we will reopen the floor. And those of you who have not made it yet can make it right afterwards. Okay, that depends on your distribution of floors among the political groups, if you may. Okay, Vice President Skinas, for your presentation on Greece.
Thank you. Thank you, President. Honorable members, let me start by saying that the right to asylum and the principle of non-refoulement are core principles of the European Union. This is what defines us. This is why we are seen as a beacon of hope for people around the world. We have an enormous amount of good in this respect. We are symbols of, we're a force of good, if you like, in the world, and we can be proud that we have been upholding these principles during the Syrian refugee crisis, during the Arab Spring, throughout the takeover of the Taliban in Afghanistan, and now again in the unprecedented situation of the millions of Ukrainian refugees fleeing Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Anything that undermines those principles has no place in our Union. And we cannot turn a blind eye. Any violation of the right to asylum is unacceptable. The European Union was, is, and will always remain an asylum destination for those who flee war or persecution. At the same time, we all agree that a meaningful European migration policy should also rely on a continuous, relentless fight against smugglers, the protection of our external borders, and under no circumstances I personally see that these principles are antithetical or cancel each other. We can do both. We were, of course, concerned to see the images presented by the New York Times, even if the Commission was not in a position to verify this footage. We were also the first to say very clearly that if these allegations are true, this is a no-go. We also sent a letter to the Greek authorities asking for a full investigation, and we were happy to see that this letter was followed swiftly by the Prime Minister himself, who confirmed a thorough investigation, and an investigation that I understand has already been launched. Establishing the necessary institutional structures in member states that would allow us to monitor and investigate allegations and bring those responsible to justice if wrongdoing is established is key, not only to shed light to the events, but to prevent these incidents from happening at the first place. We have consistently incorporated an obligation to all member states to set up independent monitoring mechanisms in our proposal for the screening regulation as part of the pact which is now under your consideration. But we have also not been waiting for this to be in force to be able to act in the meantime. We have supported Greece, and they have now set up a three-tier system to ensure compliance with the provisions of the European Charter of Fundamental Rights and the EU acquis, And we have been working with the Greek authorities to set up additional structures in the form of a Committee for Fundamental Rights Compliance and the new Fundamental Rights Officer in the Ministry of Migration. These structures, which are now there, need to be put to use and allow us to bring those who are responsible for any wrongdoings to justice. We expect this investigation to be thorough, and this investigation should also include all relevant aspects around the alleged incident, including appropriate responsibilities at operational level. Let me conclude by taking this opportunity once again to underline that the Commission is fully mobilized to ensure that the right to seek asylum and the principle of non-refoulement are fully respected and safeguarded across the European Union. To this end, I would like to thank you all for playing a key role in making sure that this is the case.
President, for your presentation. Now we open the conversation, we open the discussion. Just let me, by a signal, know who is making the point for 2 minutes for every political group. It'll be you, Jerome, first. 2 minutes, please. Stick to the timing because Vice President should be leaving by 45.
Yes, thank you. It would be great if we can do that also throughout the session. There are many colleagues here who took 4 minutes for their contributions, and it's not fair if that then goes at the expense of other people who want to speak later in the debate. But thank you very much, Vice President Skinas, for joining us today, and thank you very much also for your statement, I think, which we share completely. Yes, there is the right to asylum. Any violation of that right is unacceptable, and at the same time, we believe, like you do, in a European coherent policy that also includes strong border protection and fighting against people smugglers. And we also know that the reality on the ground is often more complex and not as straightforward as we sometimes like to believe in meeting rooms like these. There is the geopolitical context in the Aegean Sea. There is a lack of guidance still also from the European Commission, I believe, in how to apply, for instance, the maritime border surveillance regulation in real-life situations. There is dangerous situations for both migrants and authorities involved. There is a constant stream of disinformation from the Turkish side. And in all this, ever since 2015, Greece is still shouldering the main part of responsibility for people arriving in the European Union, saving 320,000 of those in those years. So yes, it is important that every alleged incident is fully investigated. So we can make this distinction between what is interception at sea, which is legal and necessary part of border management, and other situations like the ones we saw on the footage of the alleged incidents. And you said yourself the Commission couldn't verify the footage. Is there any additional information you have received from EU agencies in Greece, like Frontex, for instance, that could shed light on the footage? Because this is very important. We've had debates here before about incidents, filmed incidents, where there were high emotions, severe accusations were made, and in the end the stories were retracted by the outlets that published them in the first place because they were not believed to be true anymore. So we need to get all the facts on the table before we draw any conclusion. It's important, like you said already, that the Greek government has committed to this investigation. I'm not sure whether it was already before or after the call was made to the investigations, but this is the most important thing, and I think we should also carefully look forward to the results of that investigation and then see if any other steps are necessary or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerome. Vice President, your reaction.
Yes, I do not have any other additional information on the footage or the alleged incident. I saw what you saw. This circulated 2 days before the Greek national election. I didn't have any other input from our agencies on this alleged incident, but I agree with you that, and I reiterate what I said, that fighting smugglers and protecting the external border under no circumstances can be considered antithetical or in contradiction with ensuring the right to asylum of anyone who seeks Europe's protection fleeing war and persecution.
Thank you. Now, for the S&D, will it be Birgit?
Thank you very much, Chair and Commissioner. Now, if this incident, which made it to the New York Times, were the first one, I would have taken your answer and said, okay, we work on that. But it was not the first. We had reports about pushbacks again and again and again. And I don't want to hear something about our values, our principles. We all know this. The problem is that much too often those values and principles don't make it into practice. And even if something is going wrong, things can go wrong, we can react on it. But I heard actors, after some pushbacks, also members, high members of the Commission, going to that place, congratulating the government, it's so good that you protect our borders. After reports about pushbacks. This is not fighting pushbacks, this is empowering, encouraging people to continue that way. And it's good that you say the Greek authorities are investigating. I guess I know what will be the outcome of this, like in all the other cases. So my final remark would be, I remember it was, I think, the year 2010, when we first talked about some sad developments in Hungary. And it took us years to publicly say things are going wrong. And at that moment, democracy in Hungary already was more or less dead. And I think we are doing the very same thing with all these reports about pushbacks. And I'm tired to have these debates without ever really things improving or even saying it's hard to improve. We try, no one is following, we are lying into each other saying we stick to the principles, but then things continue. I'm really tired of this.
Thank you, Birgit. Vice President.
Well, I only speak for myself. I don't know how others speak on this incident and how they qualify them. I think I'm very clear where I stand on this. All sorts of phenomena, alleged incidents of this kind happening across our external perimeter should be investigated in a way that is credible, makes sense, and allows for responsibilities to be attributed. When we will have the pact, this will be done in a more systemic way, rules-based, because we would have, as you know, the Fundamental Rights Agency involved. In the meantime, we are trying to make it work through this independent monitoring mechanism that were set up because of our insistence. I wish to remind the honourable members that these independent mechanisms were set up because we demanded the creation of these instruments. And this, of course, now we're discussing the New York article, but what I'm saying applies to everybody engaging in similar activities. Now, Mrs. Zippel says, I know what will come out of this. I personally do not know what will come out of this. I would very much like to know. I will expect to find what happened. The fact that the Prime Minister himself publicly and generously, if I may add, assumed this as a personal obligation, it's good, and it's something that it's a credit to the trustworthiness of the investigation. And then let's wait and not put the cart before the horse. When we know what happened, then we'll see what the next steps could be.
President, now for the Renew, who will be? Birgit. No, excuse me, Sophie. Sophie.
Okay. Well, I have to say I share the frustration and the sense of hopelessness of Birgit, because how many years is it? And to hear, oh, we've seen images, but we don't know, we cannot establish investigation, inquiry. Come on, come on. The video is crystal clear. Now, about the investigation launched by the government, that's very good news. But who's going to investigate? Is it the National Transparency Authority that has investigated the pushbacks before? The National Transparency Authority who found that there was no problem. But there's the Helsinki Monitor that I referred to earlier, an internationally recognized NGO that has taken 200 depositions But the National Transparency Authority, which is again going to investigate, has not heard any of the victims, nor the Helsinki monitor. So that's not a serious investigation. And they're going to investigate again? Well, you know, brings the tears to my eyes. You mentioned a positive step, the appointment of a fundamental rights officer within the Ministry of Migration. However, the mandate of that person does not cover pushbacks. So what's the point? Now, the third issue is that the judiciary in Greece is excruciatingly slow. So even if a case ever gets to the court, you know, by the time there is a ruling, people have actually forgotten what it was all about. A reporting mechanism was supposed to be set up under the new Human Rights Commissioner. I would like to know, is that up and running? And then a final remark, you referred to, you know, once we have the pact, things will go better. This is not about the future. This is about investigating criminal behavior. You've seen the images. You see Coast Guards lifting a 6-month-old baby onto a raft. And then those same people have been filmed when they arrive in Turkey. Where's the humanity in this? Where's the sense of urgency in the Commission? This is not the European way of life. And I do not have confidence in the Commission that you are going to tackle this.
Okay, Vice President, you heard it.
Yes, I think that this is also about the future for a very simple reason, because we are now forced to work on an ad hoc basis precisely because we do not have the arrangement that we're looking for in the future, which we'll hopefully have in the future, that would allow us to work in a way which is not, again, on an ad hoc basis, incident to incident, so on and so forth. Now, I described the three years structures that have been put in place: the National Transparency Authority, the system for fundamental rights, and the mechanism within the ministry. On your question about the National Transparency Authority, I think that this is the major anti-corruption authority. My colleagues working on this clearly confirm that the people involved are of the high professional standard of auditors. Clearly, this is an area that has not been in their core duties in the past. It's new for them, but that's precisely because it's a big test for them, Sophie, to make sure that they can do what we expect them to do. These people have been trained by UNHCR, and they have to give them some margins to make the best effort. And if need be, as I was saying earlier in my speech, in my opening statement, we would expect the investigation not only to cover the systemic deficiencies, but also to identify those responsible at operational level that would have to be brought to justice and answer for what they did.
There are 200 depositions, 200 testimonies of victims.
On that, what you heard?
I think I answered the question on the National Transparency Authority, which was the question, right?
Okay, now we move on to the Greens. Erik Markart, Sie haben das Wort.
Yes, thank you. Would be actually good to find out who's responsible for this, especially because we know that there is a secret fund in the Migration Ministry for example, paying the life rafts where people are put on when they are abandoned at sea. But I'm not so specifically interested in the one case because, as others said, there are many cases with videos, with victims, with like everything is totally clear. And that's why we also had a clear report by Olaf, and last time we asked you if you read the report. I remember that you were not able to answer this question. So my first question is if you read the Olaf report and what you think about it if you read it. Second question is, you said that fighting smugglers is a priority, and I agree. That's why my question would be, I think you heard about the fact-finding mission by the United Nations Human Rights Council in Libya, and there was a report that the Libyan Coast Guard is involved in smuggling activities. So would you agree that the Libyan Coast Guard cannot be paid anymore if they are involved in smuggling activities, or do you think it's a good idea to pay people who are involved in smuggling with EU taxpayers' money? Third question is interception at sea. Jeroen Linaire said it's legal to intercept, in some cases, people at sea, and of course it can be legal. But if there is a boat with asylum seekers in Greek waters, can you explain how does it look in practice if you intercept people, or if it's, according to the Commission, legally possible to intercept boats with asylum seekers at sea? Yeah, that's the question.
Thank you, Vice President.
Yes, Eric, on your specific questions. First question, is there a secret fund? I do not know, and I would be surprised if there would be one, frankly. Two, Olaf report on Frontex. I think that this is somehow behind the new cycle. Many things happened in Frontex since then. As a result of the report, the former executive director resigned from his functions. We have a new director who had the confidence both of the member states and of this House and of the Commission. We have to give him the credit now to lead the necessary transition of Frontex from a small office in Warsaw to the biggest EU agency up to 2027, and this is a collective effort that I personally will back with all my forces, and I think that we should merit to see this transformation happen as soon as possible. Then, is Commission money paying for smuggling operations? No, it's not. And finally, what will happen on interception at sea? I'm not a Coast Guard commander. I'm not running operations. I am the Vice President of the Commission overseeing a number of policy areas in close cooperation with commissioners who work with me. And I'm sure that the acquis Frontex regulation clearly specifies what Frontex commanders can and cannot do on the ground.
Move on to the following. Madame Chagnon, pour ID. Vous avez la parole.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Well, if these allegations prove true, then this is very serious. But at the moment, we have to, we're talking about allegations and no proof. I was part of the same mission to Greece as my colleague Sophie Intervent, and I clearly have a different interpretation than she does, as what we heard from the NGOs there, particularly from Frontex. And following the publication last week by the New York Times of this video, I got in touch with contacts within Frontex to see what they thought about these videos. So these are people, and I'm going to quote what they said in English.
La conversation a eu lieu, c'était jeudi.
The conversation was on Thursday, I think, on the 31st.
I said, we have no knowledge of this New York Times issue. It was not yet brought to us officially yet. So we have no elements to give you because we have not yet been reached out to on this subject. Ceci veut bien dire que l'agence.
So that means that the European agency Frontex wasn't informed, and I think it would be better to wait rather than just reacting to these images. I think it is important for us to have proof, to have analysis and proof and conclusions on all of this. For some of my colleagues, I would just like to record that allegations, particularly in Greece, we were told it was coming from the same NGO, which is posting loads of testimonies, but these allegations are not the same as proof under the law.
No, I'm not in a position to mediate with between a member of the European Parliament and another member of the European Parliament on how they understood the information given to them. I think that this is not for me to do. I maintain my position that this alleged incident will be investigated thoroughly, and appropriate measures will be taken once the investigation is concluded.
Thank you. And now, left, Madame Pelletier.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Commissaire.
Thank you very much. Commissioner, you're talking about the principle of the non-refoulement. Every 2 years, we hear about refoulement, and we get testimony, and all of that is set out very clear. And I mean, these are allegations. It does show us things that seem to be happening, things that are atrocious, inhuman, and unbearable. I mean, if this were the first time, you could say, well, maybe it's an exception, but this isn't the only case that we've seen. And so I'd like to follow up on the question that Sophie asked, and I don't think you answered. Who's going to carry out an investigation relating to the video? And while we're waiting for an investigation, are you aware of the interpreter for Frontex who was with, and that was supposed to be published in 2022? Because I think it is important that we have all of these evidence, because you've talked about the values that you're very attached to. Madame Pelletier.
Yes, what I could say to that is that we have this independent mechanism. We've requested an independent body to be in charge of the investigation with a view to transparency. And obviously, human rights officer, which is a parallel structure. The fact that the Prime Minister himself has publicly assumed responsibility for the investigation, and if you also bear in mind the tone in which he used that he categorically expressed concern for after seeing the video, obviously we have to follow that. When it comes to the Frontex interpreter, I have no information on that, but I don't know whether Ilva perhaps had...
If there was any follow-up of this, the Frontex interpreter.
Yes, I spoke last week to the director of the NTA, the Independent National Transparency Agency, Mrs. Rukaku, on this topic with this investigation, but I also asked her what happened to this investigation with this Frontex employee that was also deported. And she told me that this is now with the public prosecutor. And I asked if you could send me the report, and she said we have to ask directly to the public prosecutor to have the report. So we will do that.
Both Vice President Sknas and Eva. Now, we actually made it beforehand, because we were actually pushing the pace forward, stepping up the pace, but we still have some minutes to go. So if you may, I see that some other members would like to contribute. I will give you 1 minute and a collective gathering, and then final round for Vice President and Commissioner. I understand, Mr. Furlas. Would you like to make it in 1 minute, please?
No. Thank you, Chairman. In this room, some time ago, we heard a story about a child that died in a small islet between Greece and Turkey. We heard many things against Greece, and finally it was proven that this was fake news. I had nobody asking to be pardoned for this. You hear some accusations today, some allegations, and the Commissioner says that the allegations are going to be examined, and I see people who are angry. They turn against Greece. They're as if their head is steaming. They talk against Greece too much. They should search this, why they're so angry against Greece. We're talking with evidence here.
we don't talk based on what an NGO says that is proven afterwards fake news. And if people are angry against against a country, they shouldn't speak against a country like this. Also, I don't accept from any colleague to point and wave their finger against me. Thank you.
Here from Pietro Bartolo, I understand that you would like to make a point. Make it in 1 minute. Lo faccia in un minuto, prego.
Sì, grazie. Ho apprezzato le...
Well, yes. Thank you, Vice President. I appreciated what you said on guarantees to the right to asylum, but if the Greek authorities are found to have been responsible, what kind of sanctions will they face? How far can we go? Because this is a negation of the right to asylum rather than actual refoulement. And then with regard to Poland, I mean, what's the story there? We saw the Polish authorities pushing people back there. Which measures were taken there? And what about with regard to Italy, when people were pushed back from Italy to Slovenia, and then Croatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Italy when people were pushed back into the sea? A fishing vessel disappeared a few weeks ago with 500 people, and we discovered that it had been sent back to another country, perhaps Libya, I'm not sure. So which measures are going to be taken there? And then you talked about the European way of life, a nice explanation of that, but why don't we use the same method for migrants? Why don't they get the same way of life? And then a question to Commissioner Johansson. She says that we work well with NGOs. Well, I don't see that. I mean, in Italy, they're criminalized, they're sent away from areas where they could rescue people. I mean, you've got a ship at the moment which is subject to sanctions and has been seized because they save people at sea, because it's become a crime to rescue people at sea. So how are you going to act given those situations? Thank you.
Still, Sophie Intveld would like to re-ask.
I repeat my question to the Commissioner. How can we have trust in an independent investigation by the National Transparency Authority if that same authority has investigated the pushbacks in the past but has refused to take the deposition of the 200 victims plus the Helsinki monitor that is subject to harassment and intimidation? Will the investigation include the depositions taken by the Helsinki monitor?
Mrs. Bielowski, also a question, very short.
Very short. Thanks for dealing with this topic today. I want to say it's the least we can do, but in fact that's not true. And I know it has been said a lot, pushbacks are a crime, they are a shame. I don't think we can say this often enough, and therefore I will do it again. And I just want to say that letters and words will not cover this situation. We can't allow an institution to be allied to those who break the law and do this at European borders now for years. And to watch and to wait is only a part of what increases brutality and what increases the frequency of what happens there. And what I want to do very quickly is to thank all the brave people out there who help uncover the breaches of rights, the violation of human rights where others fail to do so, who save lives where others fail to do so. And we really do need consequences to the things we know and see happening, who are proved that are happening, and it's people being put in danger, lives being put in danger, people being put in open waters in a Europe that carries the Nobel Peace Prize that is built on human rights. And please, can we get some answer on the steps and measures that can be taken now to really end the pushbacks and how we can take action, and how can we take action and it doesn't include waiting or trusting in what has betrayed us before. Thank you.
Well, I see the hand of Madame Chagnon again. Encore.
Once again, Mrs. Chagnon, to the point and brief. Yes, very brief. Thank you. I'd just like to repeat my question because I would like to know whether Mrs. Ylva Johansson is able to give us a timetable for the implementation of the Migration Pact. And I'd also like to know whether Commissioner Johansson can tell us whether the Commission is thinking of setting up these Asilia centres, as I've said, for people asking for international protection but outside the European Union, so that we can reduce the flows of migrants that are coming onto the European continent.
Monsieur le Vice-Président.
Over to you, Vice President, and Mrs. Johansson.
Thank you, President. You would allow me for these closing replies to speak in my mother tongue, starting replying to Lucas and to the rest of the points.
Mr. Furlas referred to the specific case. Let's mention this so-called case, the video. There was a small island on the river Evros, and they mentioned a little girl. We did not know if the little girl existed or not until we learned what happened. A lot of ink was used, and he recalled this story. I won't go into the details about this case, to recall that yesterday and today, the Greek authorities, the interim government, the caretaker government, who's in power now, saved 100 migrants, including children, from 2 small islands on the river Evros. We are 2 hours in the room of European democracy talking about the video on the New York Times, and I would like to hear somebody mentioning this, that in our external borders there is humanity, there is solidarity. This did not happen. Never mind. Lucas didn't mention it. Lucas recalled the river Evros, and that's why I mentioned this event. Now for Mr. Bartolo. Mr. Bartolo rightly raises the issue of these practices above and beyond the Greek case, where your committee devoted so much time, and rightly so. I would like to be clear, Mr. Bartolo. You mentioned other countries as well. Any responsibility is proven from these events in any country of the European Union, and of any political color of this country, big country, small country, eastern country, western country, the reply of the Commission will be the same. The reply will be the same. As soon responsibilities are found, they will be given, and the sanctions will be employed. Mrs. Infeld insists to ask whether I'm certain that the National Transparency Authority will do the investigation correctly. It seems she's convinced that the authority will not do this. I would prefer to wait and see if the investigation will be correct. If during the investigation there are some proposals, such as the one you made about the Helsinki monitor, or any other contributions that would help the investigation, personally, I have no problem. All these proposals could be submitted, and if necessary, the Commission can help for these to be submitted. I'm certain that Ilva and her services will have no problem. But I do not agree, I will not do this to doubt, to challenge the National Transparency Authority, because I made a battle to create this authority. I will do it at the end of the procedure, not beforehand. For Mrs. Pavlovsky, I agree that whoever saves lives and whoever has a role in management of the migration problem from a human point of view, I'm certain that can look forward to our support and the help and the assistance of the European institution. Thank you once again, Chairman and dear members, for this useful exchange of points of view today.
Ylva Johansson.
Thank you. First on the 2 questions. So when it comes, the view of the Commission is that NGOs are doing a very important work. They are actually saving lives. They are helping people in distress. They are doing what is absolutely necessary in many member states. And truly humanitarian assistance should not be criminalized, and that is the view of the Commission. When it comes to the timetable for the implementation, I think I answered that already. So the legal regulation in the different files defines when it has to be implemented. But having said that, I think that we will need to have, more focus on the implementation of the pact. And I foresee that that could be a discussion together with the co-legislators when we come to the end of the whole pact negotiations, because I think we're going to need that. But that will be also for the co-legislators to be part of that discussions. People can be recognized as refugees in centers in third countries. That happens already today. That's very often, that is what UNHCR is doing. And then they are being resettled to countries like our member states, but also to other countries. So that is the answer to that question. If the question is, should we have centers outside the EU instead of having a proper asylum system in the European Union, then my answer is no. I had got no questions on this specific issue, but can I also allow me to say a few words on this case that we are discussing? I think it's important what's been mentioned, that what seemed to be on these videos from the New York Times published seem to be clear deportation. And this is not the first time that we had this situation. That's the reason, actually, why more or less 1 year ago, I had a very important meeting with 5 of Greek ministers on this topic, with the aim to say that deportation must stop, and also using the facilities that the co-legislators has given to me, that all funds allocated under member states' programs from the Home Affairs funds under this mandate, 21 to 27, is subject to the so-called horizontal enabling conditions, which includes to make sure that we have arrangements to ensure the respect of the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union. And that's one reason why Greece actually set up many of these functions that we now need to use in this case. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. That'll do. And now we're making it 1 minute lagging behind, but fair enough. It's been quite a discussion, the one we just had, and certainly that's not the end of it. We're waiting for the pact. We're waiting for the delivery of this mandate on migration and asylum files. Okay, now we move on to the final quarter of an hour, which is scheduled for the slot this afternoon, which is a report on emission. But first, we wave goodbye to both of our guest speakers. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
Okay, final track. It's 15 minutes left. Just to have a word on the mission of the LIBE committee, following our routines. Whenever there is a mission which has been mandated by the LIBE committee, which has been commissioned by the LIBE committee, there is a report on the mission. Okay, and that report concerns now mission Belgium, Netherlands, and France, 20 to 22nd February this year. You know how it's like. Struggling with reception, asylum seekers. Some members of the LIBE committee visited these member states as to developments of ad hoc settlement to receive asylum seekers. Hans, Calais, observing measures taken against the background of increasing crossing into the channel of the UK, smugglers' networks, observation on the common asylum system, delivery on the matter. And for reporting us on the mission, the floor is to Lena Dupont, who was heading the mission. Okay, the floor is yours, Lena.
Thanks, Chair. Again, and in short, the report is about the delegation visit that LIBE committee had done in February of this year, visiting, while others were going to Asia or Spain or somewhere else, we were going to Brussels. So to Belgium, France, and the Netherlands. We conducted a series of meetings consisting of NGOs, officials, in reception centers, about reception centers and the registration process. And of course also addressing the challenges of the channel crossing, especially when it comes to France, but also to the other two member states, and addressing and tackling organized crime and smuggling networks in the case of or in relation to asylum and migration. What we saw during the mission, or at least the main aim of the mission, was to monitor the reception capacities in both the three countries and assess the current state of play of the irregular crossing of migrants between the French northern coast and UK shore. We had a good and extensive discussion with those counterparts we had on the other side. We took their note of concerns on board, and we urgently called for a more coordinated approach at all levels in the management of migrant-related issues. We also saw that there are problems with reception capacities in Europe, which is due to several factors. Some of them include the inadequacy of contingency planning, especially after 2015, the increase in material and housing needs following the rising numbers of arrivals,